Volume 1, The Attack. Near the monument, she found herself face to face with a real skeleton with glittering eye sockets. It produced a shrill noise that reminded her of the awful squeal sound of fingernails against a blackboard. It triggered a long-forgotten childhood memory. She recalled the face of her sadistic teacher from her first day of school. His dark, beady eyes behind his glasses had made her shiver with fear. She shuddered involuntarily and took a deep breath as she took into account her surroundings. In front of her was the skeleton. Behind her were the wolves. It didn't look good either way. She had precious little time to decide what to do, because the wolves would be upon her in seconds and, judging by their growls, they didn't mean well. Sybil Crewes tapped her pencil on the desk while she glared at the monitor. Her friends were in London, but she was still at the office in Boston to hold the fort. She exhaled. Damn it, she hated to sit still, doing nothing. Her glance slid to her Uzi submachine gun lying on the desk next to the keyboard. She took a sip from her cup that was filled with a red liquid. She almost choked. She put down the cup and gazed at the wall that needed to be fixed so badly the plaster was almost crumbling off. Sybil squinted at the condensation on the ceiling. One day she hoped to find a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but until then, she bit her lower lip. To distract herself, she searched for music on the computer Jimi Hendrix. She grinned. It was the only silver lining. God, she hoped to find the chosen one soon. This life, being a vampire and sucking the blood from the innocent, was something she had never asked for. But alas, because of the Necronomicon, she was changed.
An ancient curse, translated by my father.
Sybil narrowed her eyes at the thought. She hoped that her blonde tech nerd, Felicity Walker, had more luck finding the chosen one. Then she frowned. I haven't heard from her, yet. Felicity and Jason Weishart, a freelance reporter who wrote articles about the supernatural, were following Harry Brown on his flight to London. Thinking about Harry fueled her anger. Harry Brown was a former CIA agent who now worked for her arch-nemesis, the Reaper. The Reaper used the Necronomicon to raise an army of zombies. God, she thought,
if I had the Book of the Dead in my hands, I could not only end the curse, but also end this fucking army.
Sybil had faced supernatural threats many times, but she hated zombies. Mindless zombies who wanted nothing more than to chew your flesh. Just thinking about it caused a cold shiver to run down her spine and cut through her bone marrow. Yuck. Disgusting-looking zombies. But it will all end with the chosen one because he, or she, is the key to destroying the Necronomicon. It had to be a descendant of James McPherson. The pencil broke into two halves when she thought about McPherson. He was the one who had turned her world upside down by selling the Necronomicon to Sybil's father. She threw the two pieces in the trash can and pumped up the volume of the music. When a beep sounded, Sybil glanced up. Harry Brown's voice interrupted the music.
Hello, Mr. Reaper. I've located the chosen one.
An easy smile shaped her mouth, and she muted the sound while the computer recorded the ongoing conversation. Sybil opened a new window on the monitor like Felicity had taught her to get a map with coordinates. Pleased, she picked up the phone on the desk to call Felicity.
Sybil, I hope you some good news?
Felicity asked.
I'd say so.
Sybil replied.
Harry is at Weston Street.
Are you sure?
Felicity asked. In the background, Sybil heard the wind and some street noises.
Jason and I are keeping an eye on Harry's hotel room, and he hasn't moved yet.
Felicity complained.
He used his cell phone, which activated your app.
Okay. Well then, we'd better hurry. Thanks.
Felicity hung up. Soon she'd have the chosen one. Involuntarily, Sybil rubbed her tongue over her fangs. Feeling restless, she stood and moved to the window. It was getting dark. The sun was about to set. In the background, Jimi Hendrix played Machine Gun. Sybil closed her eyes while she enjoyed listening to Jimmy's guitar solo. Sybil was glad she had visited a few of Jimi Hendrix's gigs in the 1960s.
Too bad you're no longer among us,
she said under her breath. Some time passed before Harry Brown's voice interrupted the music.
Mr. Reaper, I've destroyed the building complex of the chosen one. A whole building is burning, thanks to some C4 I placed in the boiler.
Great,
the Reaper replied. Sybil gritted her teeth after hearing his voice. They had been lovers for more than 200 years until things had changed drastically once the Reaper had gotten his hands on the Necronomicon. He had told her he wanted to use it to create zombies and gather up all humans in cages like cattle, feeding them and bleeding them dry, bottling their blood and selling it to other vampires. Sybil stopped him, and suddenly, the two lovers turned on each other. The winner was yet to be decided, but for the time being Sybil kept his army of zombies small so he couldn't complete his master plan.
Oh, and I captured two of Sybil's friends, Felicity Walker and Jason Weishart.
Harry announced victoriously and hung up. All the blood receded from her face. Involuntarily, she pictured Harry's face and used him as a punching bag. Her friends were in danger, and there was nothing she could do about it. Sybil's face was getting warm. She pulled her cell phone from the small shoulder bag she wore and proceeded to speed dial Felicity's girlfriend, Vanessa Dodd's Cape, the dark blonde data analyst working for the ATU anti-terrorism unit in Boston, could help her because the phone conversation was too short to get his location. Perhaps Harry discovered his phone was compromised by Felicity. God, when she thought about Felicity, her chest ached. Sybil had saved her life when the Reaper had wanted to drink Felicity's blood after he had tied her down on a table as a romantic gesture, because Felicity was a Buffy the Vampire Slayer lookalike. And Sybil was a great fan of the famous 1990s TV show. But seeing Buffy laying on the table, surrounded by a bunch of candles with classical music in the background, made her furious. For the first time, Sybil and the Reaper argued and split up after Sybil freed Felicity from the ropes and the hungry vampire using his own scythe. That was the start of Nightbird Sybil's agency to fight evil. When Sybil dialed Vanessa's number, it went straight to voicemail, so reluctantly, Sybil left a message and hung up. She turned away from the window, her gaze drifting to the cup on the desk. Sybil grabbed it and drank it in one go. After she wiped the blood from her chin, she exhaled.
I need more blood.
Taking large steps, she went into the kitchen, holding the cup in her hands. Putting it on the table, she opened the fridge. Besides 4 cans of Coke and 2 tomatoes, it was empty. Wait, isn't that a bag of blood? She wondered and took it out. Ugh, rotten tomatoes. Quickly, she threw it in the trash can and gazed at the clock on the wall. The shops were still open. If she hurried, she could buy pig's blood from the butcher. With a sigh, she glanced at her face in the mirror and opened her mouth to glare at her fangs. In the movies, vampires can withdraw their fangs, but in reality, they can't. After a deep sigh, she took the pincer that was near the faucet. Her hand trembled as she closed the pincer on her palm. Crack. Pain shot through her, but she wasn't done yet and repeated the same exercise. A sigh of relief went through her after she'd finished, but the wounds kept bleeding until she healed them with some blood. She grabbed the cup from the table and stared at the bottom. There was some blood left. With a finger, she wiped it clean and used it to heal the wounds. Again she stared in the mirror and smiled good as new. For a few hours, she could pass for a human. After she rinsed her mouth, she headed for the exit and stepped into her Ford Mustang convertible. A few minutes later, Sybil parked the car and paced toward the butcher shop. A sign near the entrance read, "Yes, we're open." Relieved, she opened the door and was welcomed by the sound of a small bell and a rush of warm air. The smell of meat and blood reached her nostrils as she glanced at the shop's owner, Louis O'Toole. He was standing behind the counter with his curly brown hair and wearing a stained apron that used to be white at some point in the past. He grinned at her.
Well, if it isn't my favorite blood-loving customer.
Sybil squinted at him, not knowing what to say. His smile widened.
I take it you're here to buy pig's blood, huh?
Sybil nodded.
Yes, please, Louis.
It's none of my business.
Louis said, handing her a sealed plastic bucket filled with blood.
Oh, why do you want this?
He scratched the back of his head and chuckled.
You're not a vampire, are you?
Louis always asked her the same question, and she never told him how right he was. Instead, she smiled faintly and gave him the money.
Have a nice day, Sybil.
He said with a wink.
You too, Louis, thanks.
She replied and stepped outside. A man passed her on the sidewalk while she carefully put the bucket in the back seat of her car and drove back to the office.